Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a double bill of forest nightmare adventures. I hope you all will enjoy this as much as I. Big thank you to both of the authors, and I'll leave a link to their Reddit page in the description, of course, below. Tonight's stories, I believe, are a great contribution. With Halloween drawing ever closer, what better way than to celebrate with a couple of terrifying deep forest adventures. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments. Please do like and share. Don't forget the hashtag TeamFEAR. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's first story, entitled The Farm at the Edge of the Forest. Let's get straight into that. My dog, Max, had woken me up in the middle of the night, barking out the midnight darkness. He was an old bloodhound who used to be a hunting dog but has since long retired. Unfortunately for me, his senses and reflexes were still active. I opened the window and noticed screeching coming from the red farmhouse about 20 metres away. What the hell is happening? I grabbed my old trusty hunting rifle and flashlight and headed out. The first thing that caught my attention was the missing padlock securing the brown door to the farmhouse. Then I noticed the smell of metal and meat. What the? I swallowed, tightened my grip on the rifle and stepped inside. The first thing I saw was blood everywhere. On the floor, the walls, even the ceiling. Holy shit. I went further inside and saw, in the middle of the hallway, the body of one of the sheep. It was covered in blood and intestines. Oh my. I looked around to make sure nothing hostile was still there, but all I saw were the other sheep, clearly distraught. I tilted my head backwards and exhaled a heavy breath. Why now? I put down my rifle and dragged out the body to a soft spot in the lawn to the left of the farmhouse. I grabbed a nearby shovel and began digging. After I was done burying the sheep, I flushed out most of the blood from the farmhouse. I went back to my small red cabin to get some well-needed rest before my morning routine. As I laid in my bed and tried to fall asleep, I couldn't. The thoughts of tonight kept running through my head. What happened? As I laid in my bed and let my mind run its course, I finally drifted asleep. The dawn broke and the sun shone through my window. I opened my eyes to the sharp light and got up. After eating breakfast, feeding Max and doing my morning chores, I went out to the farmhouse to check on the sheep and to replace the padlock. Nothing is out of the ordinary, and the sheep seemed to have calmed down since yesterday. When I were done filling up with their food and water tanks, I stepped outside to prepare and make a trip into town to make some grocery shopping and... hold on. I looked down in the mud in front of the farmhouse door. I must have missed it before I went inside. Obviously, I saw my own footprints, but among the cluster, I saw another pair of footsteps. It looked like a human foot with toes and heels, but it was at least twice as long as mine. What the hell is this? I tried to follow the trail, but they disappeared where the mud met the grass, and it was near impossible to find any more tracks. The only clue I found was from the last step in the mud. It pointed towards the dense forest right next to the farm. Well, I'm not going following. I took a deep breath, went back inside to fetch my car keys and Max. I didn't want to risk putting him in any danger while I was gone. I could handle losing a few sheep, but I would never be able to live without Max. The trip to town took longer than expected. When I returned home, the sky had turned into a soft orange glow. The sun was still up and wouldn't set for another couple of hours. Perfect timing. I had still time to do some afternoon chores between dinner and bedtime, and if I got a good night's sleep, I may have some energy and spring a little bit of life back into this old farm of mine. I stepped out of my old rusty pickup truck and began to unload the groceries, all while grinning to myself. As I carried the bags towards the porch, I stopped right in front of it, and the smile on my face quickly faded. In the middle of the brown porch, in front of my red cabin and dark brown door, I saw it. The missing padlock. What the... How did... I stood frozen. Couldn't move a muscle. Someone had been here while I was gone and left it there. Without realising it, my heart was racing, my breath was short and fast, and I had begun to sweat. I finally snapped out of my paralysed state and acted quickly. I carried my groceries inside, picked up the padlock and locked the front door. As I examined the padlock in my hand, I noticed the shackle had been bent open. A person had to use a bolt cutter or any other tool to open a padlock, but there were no signs of such tools that had been used. Whatever bent it open was strong enough to do so. I went back outside and threw the padlock towards the forest. My breathing was heavy as I stood on my porch and stared where I threw it. I went back inside and quickly unloaded my groceries. I almost squashed some of the vegetables when I almost threw them inside the refrigerator. The sun quickly set below the horizon, but I couldn't stop thinking about everything I've witnessed. The padlock, the dead sheep, the footprints. I was cooking my dinner and feeding Max without really paying attention to what I did. The time was 2 hours from midnight when I decided to go to bed. Hopefully, I would have calmed down in the morning. Morning never came. It was an hour past midnight when I got woken up by Max's barking again. This time, I quickly got up and grabbed my rifle and flashlight. Not this time. I walked towards Max barking, and I found him barking at the front door. When he saw me, he calmed down, but he was still growling at the door. I was about to walk towards it, but suddenly froze. When Max's barking didn't drown any other sound, I heard a noise from the other side of the door. It sounded like footsteps and something being dragged across the porch. Shit! I must do something. I slowly reached for the light switch, controlling the porch lights, and I flicked it on. The moment the lights flashed on, the steps outside stopped, and just as soon as the sound stopped, a heavy thud could be heard, followed by fast steps disappearing from the porch. I quickly unlocked the front door and prepared to rush out onto my porch, but I quickly jumped backwards, stumbling onto my bum. On the porch lay the body of a dead, mangled sheep. I pointed my flashlight towards the forest and saw something. I didn't get a clear view of what it was, but I saw a silhouette of its shape running into the forest. It looked skinny and big. It was running on all fours. That is definitely not a human. I stared into the forest for a few seconds. I snapped out of my frozen state and got up. I put down my rifle and shone my flashlight at the dead sheep. There was a trail of blood from the grass leading up to the porch, and the trail continued back and forth on the porch. That thing must have paced back and forth while dragging the body. But why? Why not just kill and leave it in a farmhouse like the first sheep? Why kill another sheep just to... I had flashed my flashlight at the farmhouse when I noticed it. The grave. I had buried the sheep in last night. It was unearthed. That thing. It didn't kill another sheep. It had dug up an already mangled sheep. What the hell is going on? What the hell is that thing? As I stood frozen with shaky legs, Max began to bark again. This time, though, he rushed out the door, towards the forest. At that moment, I forgot everything else and ran after him. I screamed his name as I ran, and his barking became harder to hear for every second that I ran and ran, trying to catch up with him. I finally ran out of stamina and slowed down, leaned against the tree, only now realising the pain in my feet. It all happened so fast, I didn't even think about putting on some shoes. I caught my breath and listened after Max's barking. Nothing. It was dead silent. Not even crickets could be heard. Max! Please! Rustling in some bushes a few metres away caught me by surprise. Then I heard it, the sound of a familiar panting. The sound was getting closer, and I could hear small steps too. Thank God you're okay! A heavy sigh of relief exhaled from my lungs, and I pointed my flashlight towards Max. My heart jumped over a beat. I could feel the blood leaving my head as I began to feel lightheaded. Everything in my body stopped. That wasn't Max. The thing had stopped moving and froze in place as soon as I pointed my light at it. It was standing at least 4 meters away from me, on all four, with long human-like feet and hands. Its slender, pale white body was covered in blood. Its face looked like that of an elongated human face, with 2 small holes instead of a nose. The panting sounds could be heard from its small mouth. It had thin black hair reaching down to its shoulders, barely covering its face. As someone who has hunted and spent a long time around animals, I know you can look into the eyes of almost any animal and see what they are planning. You can see if it's calm, scared, or ready to attack. This thing, I couldn't see anything at all. The 2 big black holes, twice as big as human eyes, with only a small white dot in the middle of each socket, was staring directly at me. But I had no idea of what it was planning. "What do you want?" I screamed louder than ever before. I was breathing heavily and my voice echoed in the dense forest. I noticed that the thing had stopped panting. Its mouth was closed. Then, out of nowhere, it raised itself and stood up on its hind legs. I swallowed hard, as I, with shaky hands, had followed its head with my flashlight. It topped at 3 meters in height, with a straight back and its arms along the side of its body, reaching down to its knees. My body was completely stiff. If it wanted to attack, now was the perfect moment. But nothing happened. We just stood there, staring at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, the thing began running away from me, backwards. I jumped by surprise and felt my heart drop down to my stomach. It quickly ran out of my sight, but it ran backwards. It was perfectly dodging every tree that was behind it, like it had eyes in the back of its head, while running. And it was still staring at me with its hauntingly gaping eyes. When the sound of its footsteps had disappeared, I rushed back home, ignoring the pain in my feet. I arrived at my cabin, went inside and packed any necessary equipment that I could find. I ran out to my car and jumped inside, trying to fit the key into the ignition slot as my hand was rapidly shaking. I finally got the car started, and drove away with the gas pedal pressed to the floor. I glanced at my rearview mirror, watching as my farm grew smaller and smaller. But I also saw a silhouette in the faint glow from the porch lights of a long shape in the middle of the road, seemingly staring at my direction. I never truly knew what happened that night, or what happened to Max. No matter how much I wanted to have faith and go look for him, I never will. In the rest of my life, return to that farm at the edge of the forest. I fed my sister to the wolves. Let's get straight into that. I need to share this. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to post anything tomorrow. Hell, I'm not even sure if I'll even be alive come morning. But I guess that uncertainty is just part of the price I have to pay. I don't know any better place to tell my story than on here. Who else would believe me? We've all made some childish mistakes. It just comes with the territory of being a kid. You do stupid things and sometimes they end up having a much larger impact than you could ever have imagined. But have you ever made a mistake you could never forget? One there was no possible way to forgive yourself for. I have. I made the worst mistake of my life when I was 10. I'm fixing it tonight though, or I'm going to die trying. I guess this is the part where I tell you my story. Try to write out what happened and pray to any God listening that you'll believe me. Maybe you'll even learn from my experience. Selfishness can lead you to the worst places within yourself. The woods are never safe, and the price of our sins is always hefty. I didn't know any of that at 10. How could I? My parents doted on me as a child. I was their first kid, their princess, their little baby who could do no wrong. It was wonderful, and I loved having their constant attention. Nothing made me happier than being with them. When I was 5, my mama sat me down and told me that our little family would be growing. Another Cooper will be added to the bunch in a few months' time. They tried to talk it up, of course, to make it seem like the best thing to ever happen. "Oh, Amelia, you'll make such a good big sister." Oh, Amelia, you two will be just the best of friends. Oh, Amelia, aren't you just so excited? And at first, I was. I was beyond ecstatic at the idea of forever playmate. I was guessing the sex with my parents, judging names they suggested, and sitting about as they fiddled with bringing out my old crib and buying all the necessities. I was so happy. Until Todd, the boy that lived in a property closer to town, told me what their having another baby really meant. My replacement. He had said I wasn't good enough and they wanted to give it another shot, get it right this time. I didn't want to believe what he was saying, but when an older kid tells you something at that age, you tend to believe it. I reckon that's when the resentment started. Every name they suggested was dumb. The toys were dumb. They were dumb. The crib was ugly, but it was mine, and I didn't want the new baby using it. The nursery was ugly. The new baby would be ugly. I just became a whirlwind of anger at that point. My hatred for this thing that hadn't even been born yet was consuming all that I did. I have no idea how my folks managed to deal with it, really. They ended up naming her Kit Cooper. It was her name. I had suggested it in the more pleasant days of my mama's pregnancy, and I'm sure now they only went with it in the hopes that my anger would simmer down somewhat. But it didn't. I didn't touch or talk to her when we were at the hospital. I didn't help when they brought her home. I didn't want a single thing to do with the little monster. If only I knew what a real monster was back then. But hindsight is 20/20. Yeah? Nobody understood how Kit ended up so attached to me. With all the ways I mistreated her, all the ways I shoved her about and played mean tricks, it seemed so impossible that she loved me best. She was a persistent little tyke, though. She'd follow me everywhere I went, trailing after like a little duck or lost puppy. It started out real aggravating, but eventually, somehow, I started not to mind too much. I was still mad she existed, still resentful of her place as my replacement. But I suppose when my folks didn't send me packing, and Kit always craved my attention, I started to begrudgingly accept her more. At first, I stopped hollering at her when she followed me off somewhere. Then I started letting her tag along to places, showing her all the best hiding spots in our little corner of the world, and allow her to be on my team when all the other kids got together to play. Slowly, but surely, I grew just a touch more fond of her, braiding her hair, bringing her to most interesting places to explore, defending her from some of the meaner children. I don't think my mama could have been any happier watching me change bit by bit. It all came crashing down again soon enough, though. Whatever bonding had occurred was shot to hell the night of my school play. I was just turning 9 at the time, and since Kit was only 4, she had to stay home with one of the neighbours who wasn't attending the show. My parents left halfway through, and I just looked at their seats, knowing, somehow, that Kit had ruined it. My teacher had driven me home, and I found out what had happened. Kit had suddenly come down with a fever, and the height of it had concerned my folks greatly. They apologised, of course, but to me, it had all felt so false. They cared more about Kit than they ever could about me. The instance with Todd came back to mind, and I kicked myself for being so stupid. After that, things went back to how they had been originally. I started hating her again. It was so petty and stupid. I see that now. I was acting out in the most ridiculous way, my immaturity shining through. We're all immature at that age, but I was just a particular brand of spiteful brat. Kit kept following me, as she always had. I don't think she understood what had happened to go and change things. But all the yelling in the world wouldn't let her allow me out of her sight. One evening, not too long after the incident, I'd gone into the woods not far from our farmhouse after an argument with my daddy. He'd been furious when he found out I hadn't been walking Kit home from school, instead opting to leave her behind and go off with some friends. All the screaming between the two of us had made me so mad I went completely red in the face as I shouted, and the screen door was banging for the full minute with how hard I had slammed it when I left. Kit followed, as usual. Too young to read the situation. She was just 5 at the time. Looking back at it now, without my insecurities and resentment, I know she was just a sweetheart. She was determined to love me and have me love her too. I wish she could know that I do. that I did back then too, even if it was buried under so many issues as a child. I grew up in a really old town, the kind filled up with pastures and woods, where the driveways are usually dirt instead of road, and you can always trust your neighbour to watch your kid. It was the best of the country kind of life, I guess. The worst that had ever happened there was a few mysterious livestock deaths. No theft, no assault, no crime. I had never expected my little slice of heaven to house anything frightening. Which is why I wasn't afraid to rush off after sunset. Nothing ever happened in that town, so nothing could ever happen. That's how all the kids saw it, at least myself included. The ignorance of childhood or the ignorance of a small town citizen, I don't know. I noticed her only when my anger had reached a peak and I was deep into the trees. I turned on Kit and started yelling. It was all her fault. Everything was her fault. Mama and Daddy didn't love me anymore because of her, and I couldn't stand to be near her. I don't think I'd ever been so brutal with my words before then, or even after, now that I think about it. I continued my tirade until long after her cheeks were blotchy and red, puffed up as she sucked in deep breaths between her sobs, struggling to get her words out. I couldn't make out anything that she said between her breaths, crying and blubbering noises. I don't even remember feeling any remorse for sending her into that state. In a fit, I pushed her and kept on yelling. I can't recall whatever I said by this point. I just know it was the nastiest, rudest things I could possibly think up at the moment. I just wanted her to go away from me, to leave me to cry out all of these frustrations and slink back home when the moon got higher up. I'd know Daddy had calmed down enough once it was up in the sky fully, facing down on us and making me feel small. She squeaked as she fell, hitting the forest floor with a slight thump. She wasn't too heavy at 5, so that didn't surprise me in the least. I told her to get up and go on home, so I could be alone finally. I stormed off, running to put distance between myself and her. I had intended to get deep into the woods, deeper than I'd ever explored before, and leave her in the dust. When I noticed the flickering flames of a fire, soon to go out, I followed. It was probably some kids from further in town, older ones that would keep my sister at bay. It seemed like a good idea to follow the dying embers and the music. How was I ever so stupid? I could only hear girls whooping and laughing. I suppose knowing it was older girls made me a touch more comfortable, and I slipped behind trees to peek in, hoping to spot a friendly face that could attest to me being cool and mature enough to join in. God, I was anything but mature then. They all seemed to be older teenagers, none of which I had seen around before. I knew almost everybody. It was a small place after all. I stayed quiet, not wanting to get caught. I didn't know these people, and it made me nervous. I was so nervous that it took me longer than it should to have registered what I saw around them. It was no longer than 10 seconds that had my attention. It was the 4 or so bodies scattered across the clearing, blood spilling out of the wounds onto the grass and twigs. I almost gagged, bringing a hand to my mouth as tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I couldn't comprehend a thing, and frankly, I'm shocked I didn't scream or faint or go into shock. As the girls danced and laughed together while in the flames flickering progressively lower, they began to twisting about in ways far different than before. A blonde reached to her shoulder blades, fingers then digging into her own skin. She tore herself apart easily, and I closed my eyes tight for a moment, praying to disappear right then and there. What had been a pretty girl revealed itself beneath the skin. Hair all over, and what seemed to be a snout. Ears? I thought for sure I was hallucinating. Utterly impossible, I thought. No way. One by one, the girls shed their skin and became a cross of canine and human. I didn't know how to explain it. I still don't. Even after 11 years later, I still couldn't put into words what I saw that night. Hulking beasts unlike anything I'd ever seen in a late-night monster movie. I choked back a sob, blinking rapidly as silent tears began streaming down my cheeks, and stared into the clearing. A little girl in pink pyjamas had entered, flinching away as the beasts approached her. It took me a second to register that it was Kit, that she was standing there, just inches away from what nightmares were made of. The beast reached its hand down towards her, bony, hairy, long and tapered with claws. I sucked in a breath as Kit reached for the offered palm. Did she want to go? Had I driven her away? Or was it just the instinct of a small child to take a hand when it was offered? I knew. I had only a moment to react. I could swoop in, save my sister and run like hell, screaming loud enough to wake the dead in an effort to get help. I could throw stones and broken up branches at the beast until they scurried off. Or I could scream, draw attention, draw on a distraction and yell for Kit to get help. It all seemed possible, if risky. There was a chance Kit and I could go home, sleep in our beds tonight and be safe with our parents. But if I let her go, I would have my family to myself again. I wouldn't have to share with her. I wouldn't have to be dropped when Kit came calling. When Kit needed the littlest thing, I would be important again. I bit my lip and closed my eyes, resting my forehead against the rough bark of the tree. I counted to 10 over and over as I listened to the crunches of leaves and twigs and whatnot. I listened to these creatures take off with Kit. I listened to what I thought was just a nitty-gritty solution to my problem. I listened to what was, at the time, unknowingly, the worst mistake and biggest regret of my life. I listened to the beginning of the end, and I did nothing until long after the woods had returned to silence and the heat of the fire was gone. When the crickets had got to chirping again, and the sky was beginning to flick colours, I bolted home. Tears had again started to pour down my face, and every sentence came out jumbled. The police were already there when I got home. My folks having been worried sick over me and Kit staying out so late, when they noticed she was, for once, not trailing behind me at all. All hell broke loose. So many hours spent searching. I was honest. I told the police that I had seen her go off with monsters. They thought I was blocking out a horrific memory, and that my brain was protecting me from something too painful to know as fact. My brain wasn't that kind. I had to live with the memories, live knowing it was the fact of what I had done, with my mama and daddy cradling me then, crying and stroking my hair and thanking God for sending me home. I knew I had made the wrong choice. As angry as I was, as furious as I wanted to remain, it was no match for how badly I wanted Kit there with me. I fed my sister to the wolves, and there is no bigger mistake in the world. I often thought about what would have happened had I been a better sister, what sort of adventures we would have had, what memories we could have made, and what person she would have become. I longed to go back, to fix my mistake, to trade places and put things right. I've kept hope that maybe she's alive, that maybe she's in a different part of town, under a different name with a different life, or even that she's dancing around a fire and shedding her skin under the faint light of the moon. Maybe she's in the same town somehow, alive and happy somewhere, at least. I wallowed in this regret for so long, for 11 years. My folks aren't together anymore, the loss proving too much a strain for them to handle, and I've long since moved away from that town. I don't talk much to either of them nowadays. If they only knew, I couldn't handle seeing that pain, that betrayal and disappointment. It would destroy me. I ran away from that town to escape my demons. But I'm going back tonight. I left something important behind so many years ago, and I'm going to get it back, even if it kills me. Wow, absolutely fantastic stories there tonight. Really, really special treat, I think, for you guys. Of course, as ever though, please do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share and help build this channel and the community. Thank you all so much for your kind words and support. I'll be going through the comments tomorrow and try and get back to all of you as much as possible. As you know, there's the merchandise store. Get yourselves a wonderful warm jumper for winter. And also we have Patreon. Check that out for some exclusives that are coming up over the next week. I hope you're all doing well and happy in life. And above all, remember, if you're going backpacking, hiking, camping, or just generally out in a deep, dark forest, keep your wits about you. Keep your eyes open. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.